Hi, my name is Cory and this is Andrew Bateman of Bateman Labs, and this is how to build IKEA furniture the right way. Don't throw this out just yet. There is important information in there for how to put a bunch of these together, but we are going to go over the Ivar today and show you how to put together right. So to start, I've taken all of my hardware and I've got it assembled, organized, and put into some little dishes so they don't get everywhere. If you're doing a bunch of these, you will thank yourself later for that. Also helps to have a partner. All IKEA furniture is easier with a partner, but if you don't have a partner, you just have to make it.
We're going to be assembling this on a bench today for you, but we would highly recommend the floor. It's probably the most ideal spot for you, but if you have a bench around, by all means.
So to start, we're going to put the hinges, the hinge plates on the gables first, because it's just going to be easier to do that now than when it's assembled. IKEA recommends doing it afterwards, but we think it's best to do it before. You're going to want to grab your Phillips screwdrivers or posi drive. And then you've got your hinge plate and a little plastic base to sort of space out the hinge plate. At the end of the instructions, it tells you to throw these out if it makes your doors fit incorrectly. But we're going to put it on to start. The hinge plates have letters on them because this is used for all kinds of different IKEA furniture. We're going to be putting the holes into B. And the way you identify the hinge holes is you've got all your shelf pin holes in the gables here, and you'll notice there's two extras on one side, both on the top and bottom, and that's how we identify those. So let's put those in. We're going to be using the short, fat Phillips machine screws.
Now, Cory mentioned that we're using Phillips screwdrivers. Specifically, this is a number 2 Phillips. Now, your hinge plates always come with a little arrow on them, and the arrow points to the front of the cabinet.
Now where you place these screws is part of the adjustability of these hinge plates. It allows you to adjust the door up and down. We're going to try and just get it as close to center to start, and then we can move it from there if it doesn't fit after final assembly. Maybe a star wipe. Everybody likes a star wipe, right? That's current and modern.
Make sure those 4 screws are nice and snug in there. You don't want those to be loose.
Now, IKEA suggests that you assemble this all sort of on its back or on its front, like this. We're going to suggest that instead you build it on top of the gables. So we're going to take our tops and bottoms.
Notice they have no holes in them.
They are interchangeable, really. The one has a sticker on it. You probably want that on the top where it's going to be hidden on the underside. So we're going to put the dowels into the gables first.
Take your trusty mallet and hit them in if you need to.
Some are tight, some are loose. There's going to be some variation.
So while Cory gets the rest of the dowels in the other side, I'm going to put the bottom piece into the side.
Now I put the ugly stickered side on this side, so we are going to call that the top, the one that's closest to you. Now this back piece has to go in before we put the other gable on, and we've got this cleat that is going to hold this back piece sturdy. It's also going to act as the place that you're going to drill this into the wall if you're building this like a floating cabinet. So one side's got just a hole, and the other side has a hole and a little divot here called a countersink. We want the countersink on the inside. They don't mention that in the manual at all. So this is not fun. It's going to be a little bit tricky, but rest that into the groove there. Textured side is the back, and this is where your friend is going to come in real handy. Get that into the slots.
Slide it down. Might have to play with it a little bit, jiggle it around. When it's seated correctly, your top stretcher piece will be flush and just the tongue will be sticking out.
At that point, we can put on the other gable. This is where you're going to have advantage over us being on the floor. But I've got my trusty friend on the other side to help me bring my dowels in. And from there, we can take our big long Conformat screws and use the IKEA wrench that they've provided and drive those into the gables. Do the one side that you've got sitting up first, and then we'll flip over and do the other side. These will actually drive into the soft pine a little bit, so you can get them nice and flat, and you can get them right up against the wall or up against each other, or even cover it with something else later. Ready to flip? Ready to flip. The nice thing about this method is that gravity is always on your side. Always recommend, if you can have gravity help you, you might as well. Okay, from here we can flip it upright.
We'll put it that way so you can see the cabinet and what we're doing.
Now we can start installing the hinges and putting doors together.
So these hinges, they just go right into the hole that's pre-drilled on the door. Just line up all the holes. Get out your trusty screwdriver once more.
Yep, and we're using the short stubby Phillips screws.
Now, these holes aren't sized perfectly for these specific screws, so you have to push down a little bit when you go to screw them in. Now we'll put the doors on. So this is another place where a friend comes in handy.
I'm gonna put those into the slots. You can see there's a little hole and then followed by a slot, so you can push it in the hole and then it rides in the slot. This also is part of your adjustability. It can go in, it can go out, and that's gonna end up pushing the door flush against this surface here or with a little bit of a gap. These seem to be designed to go pretty close to flush, so we're gonna get pretty close to that if we can.
Now you might have noticed that we flipped the cabinet now up to rest on its bottom or top. Either way will work, and that makes it easiest to install the doors. If you have it resting on its side or on its back, it's going to be a little more difficult to install the doors, so we always recommend installing the doors with the cabinet right side up.
That's looking pretty good so far, but it's hard to know how good it's going to look until you get that other one on there, and once they're both together you can adjust them until they match. So we're just going to repeat that process.
Okay, so adjusting your doors will consist of these two screws and these two screws that you put on with the hinge plates here. So these two adjust the height, and to do that, you have to loosen off both of them just a little bit. Once they're loose, you can push and pull this up and down wherever it needs to go to adjust it that way. I'm gonna leave ours for now because it's looking pretty good. And if you need the door to come out or in, that's going to be this back screw here. And that's the one that holds the hinge in place that you just tightened up. So if you loosen that a little bit, you can get the hinge to move in and out. Now our door needs to be moved out just a tiny bit. This last screw here adjusts the door left and right. So if you tighten this screw, it'll bring the door to the right, and if you loosen it, it'll bring the door to the left. So now that I've adjusted that a little bit, we're going to close it up and see how we're doing. That's pretty good. So this door on the right-hand side is binding. I can tell that it's binding because it's not resting against the cabinet flush. So what I'm going to do to counteract that is the back screw that moves the hinge in and out. Is I'm going to loosen those and move it away from the cabinet just a little bit. I moved it away about 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to do that on both hinges, top and bottom. Adjust one at a time. Don't loosen both at the same time. If you loosen both, the whole door will be really floppy. It'll be really hard to control. So do those back up. Check your door. Now I'm not binding. I am seeing a little bit of play down here when I press on the bottom. So what I'm gonna do there is bring the top hinge out a little further than the bottom hinge, and that will make the door come out at the top a little bit more, and it will help that sit flush against the cabinet. So I'm going to bring the top one out just a tiny bit more. Doesn't need much, maybe about 1/16 of an inch. Do that back up tight. There we go. Tight door now. This one's pretty good, top and bottom. And it looks like we have a pretty consistent gap in the middle. If you have a gap that's really out, you can adjust your front screw on the hinges to close or open that gap, whatever needs to be. If you're finding that this front screw won't adjust anymore, you can undo the back screw just a little bit, but hold on to your door so that it doesn't fall out of place. Undo the back screw just a touch, and then you'll be able to tighten up your front screw just a little bit more. And go ahead and tighten up your back screw again. With this style of hinges, that back screw really affects the front screw as well. So sometimes you have to adjust them in tandem. All right, cabinet's looking pretty good. I think that will do it.